Welcome. I'd really appreciate if you could drop a comment with your thoughts and reactions as you listen. Your feedback helps me craft better stories for you. I always thought there was something magical about the skating rink. As a kid in 7th grade, my world was pretty small. School, home, and the ice. That's where I felt alive, gliding on the rink, my worries melting away like frost in the sun. It was a typical Wednesday evening when I first saw her. Mira. She was hard to miss, a whirlwind on ice, dancing between clumsy toddlers and showing off with spins that made my head spin just watching. She had this laugh, loud and unapologetic, like she didn't care who heard. I remember thinking, wow, she really loves this. We bumped into each other, literally. I was too busy watching her and not where I was going. Watch it, newbie, she teased, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I mumbled an apology, my face burning, but she just laughed and asked if I wanted some tips. Those afternoons with Mira became the highlight of my week. She taught me how to do a proper crossover, how to spin without getting dizzy, and laughed every time I fell. Which was a lot, but she always offered a hand to pull me up. Mira was amazing, not just at skating, but at making everything feel like an adventure. We started hanging out after our skating sessions. She loved horror movies. The scarier the better. I pretended to like them too, just to see her eyes light up when she talked about her favorite scenes. Sometimes she'd get so excited. She'd grab my arm, and my heart would do this weird jump. I told myself it was just the adrenaline from the movies. One day, she took my hand as we skated, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We were a team, Mira and me, king and queen of the ice. I liked the sound of that. I didn't notice when the magic started to fade, when the light in her eyes began to feel more like a glare. It was gradual, like the sun setting so slowly you don't realize it's dark until it's too late. But that comes later. For now, it was just Mira and me, skating in our little world, oblivious to the storm brewing just over the horizon. It started small, so small I almost didn't notice. Mira's texts became more frequent, her calls longer, and she always wanted to know where I was, who I was with. I thought it was sweet at first, her caring so much, but the sweetness quickly turned sour. She began talking about our future, like way in the future, college plans, where we'd live, even kids' names. It was overwhelming. I was just a kid myself, barely figuring out algebra, let alone ready to plan a life with someone. Her jealousy escalated quickly. Anytime I mentioned another girl, even in passing, Mira would freeze, her eyes narrowing. She'd interrogate me, demanding to know every detail of my interaction with them. It was like walking on thin ice, never knowing when it would crack. The rink, once my sanctuary, became a battleground. Mira's presence was suffocating. She no longer laughed or joked. Instead, she watched me, her gaze heavy and possessive. Skating together felt like a choreographed dance where every step was scrutinized. Then the incident started. My phone would blow up with dozens of missed calls and texts if I didn't reply immediately. She'd show up unexpectedly wherever I was. At school, at the mall, even at my best friend's house. Just checking in, she'd say. But her eyes told a different story. They were wild, desperate. My friends started to notice, whispering behind my back. I could see the concern in their eyes, but pride and fear kept me silent. Admitting Mira was out of control felt like admitting I was too weak to handle it. One night, she showed up at my house unannounced. My parents were out, and I was alone. The way she banged on the door, frantic and unrelenting, sent chills down my spine. When I let her in, she was a mess, matera running down her face, her breath ragged. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in, and begged me not to leave her. I could see the terror in her eyes, a terror that mirrored my own. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my arm throbbing where she'd gripped it. I realized then that the Mira I knew, the girl who laughed freely and spun gracefully on the ice, was gone. In her place was someone I hardly recognized, someone who scared me. I knew something had to change. I couldn't go on like this, trapped in a relationship that felt more like a prison. But how do you escape when the bars are made of someone else's fears? As the moon cast shadows across my room, I felt the weight of what was to come. Breaking free wouldn't be easy, but I knew it was necessary. I just didn't know the cost would be so high. I reached my breaking point on a cold, bleak Tuesday. The sky was overcast, a fitting backdrop for the storm raging inside me. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of confronting Mira twisted my stomach into knots. I chose the skating rink to end things. Our once happy place now, a chilling reminder of how far we'd fallen. As I waited for her, my heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and determination. When Mira arrived, she was all smiles, oblivious to the storm about to break. Her cheerfulness only made what I had to do harder. "Mira, we need to talk," I began, my voice trembling. Her smile faltered as I explained, fumbling over the words. I told her we were too young, that things were moving too fast, that I felt suffocated. Her face transformed from confusion to shock, then to something dark and terrifying. It was like watching a beautiful day turn into a nightmarish thunderstorm. "You can't leave me," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "You promised me forever, but I hadn't. I never did." I left the rink with a heavy heart, thinking it was over, but it was just the beginning. Mira didn't take the breakup as a full stop. For her, it was a comma, a pause before escalating her obsession. She started following me everywhere, school, home, even to the grocery store with my mom. Each sighting sent a jolt of fear through me. One night, I woke to the sound of tapping at my window. There she was, standing in the moonlight, her face twisted in a grotesque mask of desperation and rage. I drew the curtains, my hands shaking. Her messages grew more frequent and disturbing. "You can't hide from me," one read. "We're meant to be together," said another. I blocked her number, but she always found a way to reach me. My friends noticed the change in me. I became jumpy, constantly looking over my shoulder. I stopped going to the rink, abandoning the one thing I loved most. The joy I once felt on the ice had been replaced by a cold, gnawing fear. I tried to tell myself I was responsible for her, that I could help her somehow. But deep down, I knew I was just trying to ease my guilt. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of her, scared for her, and scared of what she might do. The final straw came when she cornered me at school. Her eyes were wild, her words a jumbled mess of threats and pleas. I realized then that this wasn't love or even obsession. It was something far more dangerous. I needed help. I couldn't handle this alone. Admitting that was terrifying, but it was also a relief. I was tired of carrying the burden of responsibility for Mira's actions. It was time to share that weight with someone else. Time to break the ice of silence that had imprisoned me for too long. The confrontation happened on a night that was as dark as my thoughts. I was walking home from a friend's house, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The air was heavy with the threat of a storm, mirroring the turmoil inside me. I heard footsteps behind me, quickening to match my pace. My heart raced, and I knew without looking, it was Mira. I turned to face her, and there she stood, drenched from the rain that had just begun to fall, her eyes wild with a mix of fury and desperation. "Why won't you talk to me?" she screamed, her voice breaking. I tried to reason with her, but my words were lost in the howling wind. She lunged at me, her hands clawing, driven by a madness I no longer recognized. The realization hit me like a slap. This wasn't just about a breakup. It was about someone losing themselves to their darkest demons. The struggle was chaotic. her screams piercing the night. I pushed her away, my mind racing. I had to end this, not just for my sake, but for hers too. In the scuffle, she slipped, her head hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. Time stood still. I rushed to her side, guilt and fear colliding within me. She was unconscious, but alive. The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by the weight of what had just happened. The police and ambulance arrived, their lights piercing the darkness. As I gave my statement, my words felt hollow. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragic end to a story that had started with such innocence. In the days that followed, I visited Mira in the hospital. She was getting the help she needed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Hope for her recovery, and hope for my own healing. The experience changed me. I learned about the fragility of the human mind, the thin line between love and obsession, and the heavy burden of responsibility. I had to accept that I couldn't save Mira, but I could save myself. As I returned to the skating rink for the first time since everything happened, the ice beneath my feet felt different. It was no longer just a place of escape, but a reminder of a journey through darkness into light. I had survived, but more than that, I had grown. The scars would always be there, but they were a testament to my strength, to my ability to face my fears and come out the other side. The first day of freshman year was always going to be nerve-wracking, but Ethan had never expected to find himself in this situation just a few weeks in. He took a deep breath as he raised his hand to knock on the large oak door before him, trying to steady his nerves. A muffled "come in" responded, and he pushed it open slowly. Inside the principal's office, Ethan and Laura sat stiffly across from each other, neither making eye contact. Principal Wilson was shuffling some papers at his desk, his face stern as he reviewed the incident report. According to multiple witness accounts, there was an altercation between the two of you during your last period chemistry class, he began, peering at them over his glasses. Can either of you help explain what happened? Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Laura beat him to it. It was all a misunderstanding, sir. Ethan and I have been dating for a while now, and I may have gotten a bit overly emotional in class. You know how teenage relationships can be. She flashed the principal a charming smile. Wilson turned to Ethan questioningly. He took a breath, not wanting to further escalate things, but knowing he couldn't keep going like this. That's not exactly true. Laura and I got into an argument because I tried to break up with her and she didn't take it well. The principal frowned. I see. Miss Matthews, is there any truth to what Mr. Stevens is saying? Laura sighed dramatically. I'll admit I was a little upset when he said it, but it was all in the heat of the moment. We worked things out since then. She took Ethan's hand in hers, gripping it tightly. He winced, but didn't pull away. Wilson eyed them carefully. Very well. Since this seems to have been a one-time incident, I'll let it pass with a warning. But I expect there to be no further disturbances. Understood. They both nodded obediently. You're free to go then. As they left the office, Laura rounded on Ethan angrily. Why did you have to go and tell him that, you idiot? Now he's going to be watching us. I'm sorry, Ethan mumbled. Shoulders hunched into feet. I just couldn't keep lying for you. Her glare softened slightly, and she sighed. All right, I forgive you this time, but no more causing issues for us. Got it. Ethan nodded gratefully. Laura smiled and linked their arms, immediately brightening. Come on, let's go to lunch. I'm starved. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found himself sinking deeper under Laura's control. She demanded nearly all of his free time, blowing up his phone constantly if he didn't respond promptly. His friends started expressing concern for how possessive she seemed, but Ethan brushed it off. He was just happy to have someone as popular as Laura dating him. That is, until one Friday night when he let slip. He had homework plans with his friend group the next day. "What do you mean you're not free?" Laura said coldly over the phone. "You know Saturdays are our date nights." Ethan hesitated, torn between her and his schoolwork. "I'm sorry. It's just this project is a big part of my grade. I'll make it up to you, I promise." There was silence on the other end. Then, in a choked voice, Laura said, "Do you even care about me at all? You're always putting other things first. If you bail on me again, I might do something stupid, Ethan." Panicked, he quickly backtracked. No, you're right. I'll cancel with them. You're more important. I'm so sorry for upsetting you, Laura." His friends would be mad, but it was worth it to keep her from getting hurt. Wasn't it? As her sobs turned to giggles on the phone, a knot of unease formed in his stomach. Laura was as good as her word about making Ethan pay for canceling on her. That next painful Saturday became the first of many where she demanded his constant presence, refusing to leave his side even for a moment. If he so much as glanced at his phone, she would snatch it away and delete any notifications from his friends. "You know they're just trying to come between us," she would say, stroking his hair. "I'm the only one who really understands you." Ethan tried reminding himself that he was lucky to have her attention, even if it felt suffocating at times. Still, the dark circles under his eyes seemed to grow heavier with each passing week under her control. His grades suffered too, as Laura took over more and more of his free time. Whenever he tried studying, she would whine about being bored until he gave in to her demands for affection. "Just one chapter, and then we can make out. I promise." He would try to bargain, only for her to break into tears at even the suggestion of him leaving her side for schoolwork. Overwhelmed with guilt, Ethan would console her until all hope of getting anything done that night was lost. Teachers started pulling him aside, asking what was wrong. He made up excuses, but it was obvious the promising student they knew was slipping. Even Laura's popularity couldn't shield him from the disappointment in their eyes. The final confrontation came one cold December night. Ethan had planned a study session with his friend Sam, hoping Laura wouldn't find out. But of course she did, texting him nonstop that whole evening, each message more manipulative and spiteful than the last. By the time he got home, her final thread was waiting. "Meet me now, or this will be the last you hear from me. I swear I'll do something you'll regret." Shaken, Ethan hurried to the town park where Laura was pacing furiously back and forth by the swings. "How dare you lie to me?" she hissed, pushing him hard in the chest. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." "Laura, please." "I'm sorry," he pleaded. "I just need to pass my classes. We can still be together, I promise." She laughed bitterly, as if I'd ever take back someone as disgusting and untrustworthy as you. "It's over. Ethan, I never want to see your face again." Something in Laura seemed to snap then. Grabbing him by the shoulders, she slammed their mouths together violently. Ethan struggled against her tight grip, but she was too strong, forcing her tongue between his teeth as tears of fury and desire spilled down her cheeks. Only when he went limp with terror did she finally release him, gazing down with a twisted mixture of pain and satisfaction. "You'll regret crossing me," she spat, brushing herself off briskly. Then she was gone, leaving Ethan trembling on the cold ground as the first snowflakes drifted down around him. He knew this was only the beginning. Laura would never let him escape so easily, but he had to find a way to break free before she destroyed him for good. The next few weeks turned into a waking nightmare. Everywhere Ethan went, Laura was there watching with a cruel smile, hissing threats under her breath. In the halls, she started rumors that he had cheated on her, getting himself branded as an untrustworthy flirt. No girl would go near him now, out of fear of Laura's wrath. Even classes provided no escape, as she would slide threatening notes onto his desk. "One slip, and I'll ruin everything for you," the latest one read, accompanied by a gruesome sketch of his face clawed to pieces. Ethan crumpled it quickly, though not before several other students noticed and started whispering. The final blow came on a frosty January morning when Ethan logged onto his school account to find dozens of outrageous emails had been sent in his name overnight, containing vile insults and threats targeting half the student body. He tried deleting them, but the damage was done. Within minutes, vicious gossip swirled through the halls as other students showed each other the evidence on their phones. Pandemonium ensued as teachers scrambled to control the mayhem. In the chaos, Laura smirked at Ethan tauntingly from across the crowd before slipping away unseen. He knew exactly who was behind this hacking, the same sinister force that had held him prisoner all these months. His nightmare was only deepening, and now he would have to find a way to expose the toxic truth before Laura destroyed him for good. Despair threatened to overwhelm Ethan as he sat numbly in the principal's office once more. This time, the glares from other students in the waiting area burned into him with hatred instead of curiosity. Word of the hacking had spread like wildfire, condemning him as the school's newest pariah. Principal Wilson's questioning was relentless as he demanded to know why Ethan would send such vile communications. "I didn't do it, I swear," he insisted for what felt like the 100th time, choking back tears. "Please, you have to believe me." Wilson only scoffed in response. Just then, a commotion erupted outside as familiar shouts rang out. "It was her, I tell you. Laura did this to frame Ethan. You've got to listen to us." Ethan turned to see Sam barreling into the office, flanked by a few other concerned friends who'd been trying to support him. They launched into a passionate defense of Ethan's character, while Laura sneered from the corner, protesting her own innocence. By the end, Wilson appeared deeply troubled, realizing this was no simple case of cyberbullying gone wrong. "I'll need some time to investigate these new claims. In the meantime, consider yourselves both under suspicion." The weeks that followed were a stalemate as Ethan fought to prove his case with the evidence his friends helped dig up. Laura, it seemed, had covered her tracks well in framing him for the hacking, but a few tech-savvy pals were able to retrieve deleted records showing suspicious searches for programs on her computer that matched what was used. It wasn't much, but it planted the seed of doubt. Laura's careful mask of manipulation began to crack under the pressure. Her retaliation grew increasingly volatile as control slipped from her grasp. Cruel notes left in Ethan's locker transitioned to ominous voicemails, threatening his family if he didn't drop the case. Still, he persisted where before he would have cowered. Something inside had shifted. Ethan was no longer willing to be her helpless victim. So when the final confrontation came at last, something told him he was ready. It was a hazy spring afternoon when Ethan turned a corner to find Laura lurking in the empty science wing. "This has gone on long enough," she hissed, stepping into his path. "You should have just taken your punishment like a good boy." Her hand rose as if to strike, but this time Ethan stood his ground. "No more," he said firmly, mustering all his courage. "I won't let you torment me or anyone else. It's over, Laura." A flicker of fear crossed her features at this new defiance, before her mask twisted into a twisted sneer. "We'll see about that." With a roar of rage, she lunged at Ethan, clawing wildly. But he was ready, sidestepping her attack and pinning her arms behind her back until she went limp in defeat. At that moment, Principal Wilson rounded the corner with several other staff, having just received an urgent tip from Ethan's friends. "We've seen enough," he declared solemnly, pulling a hysterical Laura away in handcuffs. At long last, the nightmare was at an end, but Ethan's real journey of healing was only just beginning. Ethan sunk exhausted onto a bench outside the principal's office, relieved yet numb. Laura's screams echoed distantly as she was led away in back of a police car, finally facing the consequences of her toxic actions. He watched the vehicle disappear down the winding drive, feeling strangely empty now that this prolonged battle was truly over. A hand settled gently on his shoulder, jolting Ethan from his trance. He looked up at Sam's kind face, offering an understanding smile. It's all going to be okay now. You're free of her for good. Ethan nodded gratefully, though part of him still felt shackled by the lingering trauma of those dark months. True recovery would be a long road, he knew, but having supportive friends at his side gave Ethan hope that in time, he could regain the happy-go-lucky person he'd once been. For now, there were still loose ends left to address with the administration before closing this painful chapter for good. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan pushed through the office door where Principal Wilson was finishing up paperwork. "I wanted to thank you, sir, for believing me in the end," Ethan said sincerely once they were alone. "I know it wasn't easy after everything." Wilson paused, removing his glasses with a sigh. "You have good friends who fought tirelessly for your character. And the evidence against Miss Matthews was irrefutable in the end." His gaze softened with sympathy. "What she put you through was inexcusable. I only hope in time the wounds will heal." Ethan nodded slowly. There was just one last question burning in his mind, one he needed answered to truly put this trauma behind him. "Sir, what will happen to Laura now? Will she face charges?" Part of him still feared her threats, even locked away. The principal's expression darkened grimly. "The police are pressing assault charges based on multiple witness accounts of her volatile behavior. As for here, she's been expelled effective immediately. I can assure you, Mr. Stevens, she will not be setting foot on these grounds again." A massive weight seemed to lift from Ethan's shoulders at those words. At long last, he was truly free, free to laugh and learn without the shadow of Laura Matthews haunting his every step, free to build real friendships without manipulation or jealousy getting in the way, free to look to the future without anxiously glancing over his shoulder. In the weeks that followed, life began slowly returning to a new normal. Ethan plunged back into his studies with renewed vigor, making up lost ground quickly thanks to caring teachers. His rapport with classmates gradually improved too, as the truth emerged and past misconceptions faded. Most healing of all was regaining his sense of self-worth and independence, no longer defined by someone else's toxic opinions. Nightmares still came from time to time, but grew further apart and less vivid with each passing day. Ethan smiled more, laughed louder, lived fully again without fear weighing him down. It would be a journey, he knew. But the hardest battles were over, under sunlight just beginning to warm his face once more. The future unfurled brightly before Ethan, a future where one person's poisonous grip no longer held power over his happiness or success. A future of untapped potential and possibilities was his to shape freely at last. And so Ethan Stevens walked on, stepping proudly into the light, leaving his pain and that grim chapter of his story behind at long last. Though scars may remain, his spirit had endured, and from the ashes of darkness rose a young man reborn. It was a warm summer evening when I first met him. The diner was bustling as usual at this hour, all shiny surfaces and the sizzle of cooking, but an empty booth in the corner beckoned. I slid in with my latte, hoping for some piece to read when he approached. "Mind if I sit?" asked a friendly voice. I looked up into warm brown eyes and nodded, curious despite myself. He filled the seat across from me, gracefully, order already in hand. Black coffee, no sugar. Quiet night. I took him in discreetly as we made small talk, broad shoulders tapering to a trim waist, the casual confidence of a man comfortable in his skin. His dark hair was close, cropped yet falling artfully over his forehead, and when he smiled, lines crinkled at the corners of hazel eyes. Perfect teeth, a strong jaw, classically handsome, yet something else flickered behind the charm. "Rick," he said, extending a hand after learning my name. His grip was firm yet gentle. "Just got back from overseas. Thought I'd wander and see what's what." My interest piqued. Oh, where were you stationed? For the next half hour, Rick regaled me with humorous tales of Army life, keeping it light. I laughed in all the right places, warming to his easy charisma. Yet fragments of what wasn't said lingered, a haunted quality to his smile, fleeting shadows behind witty anecdotes. When our cups ran dry, Rick leaned forward, eyes keen. What do you say we grab a real dinner? Get to know each other better. That is, if you're not worried the soldier will sweep you off your feet, he teased, smile crooked. I hesitated. Something tugged at the edges of my composure. Some sixth sense flashing warnings I couldn't place. But beneath the charm, loneliness shone plain as day, as if this man sought companionship as desperately as I. What harm in one simple meal? All right, I said lightly, as long as you don't try anything funny, soldier. Rick threw his head back and laughed, transforming once more into open, boyish appeal. Scout's honor. Come on, I know a great little Italian place just down the block. We slid from the booth in comfortable silence, the diner's familiar bustle already fading into pleasant memory. Stepping into the balmy night air, I followed the promise of Rick's smile into the deepening dark. As we polished off plates of pasta, Rick launched into another tale with animated gusto. His stories flowed as seamlessly as the red wine, painting lively pictures from overseas I could almost see. Yet underneath the humor, threads of something haunted lingered, brief flashes in his eyes as anecdote morphed mid-sentence, fingers drumming in anxious staccato. I pretended not to notice. Gradually, his laughter took on an edge, hands gesticulating more forcefully. My unease grew, but I smiled and laughed on cue, hoping to steer conversation lightly once more. But Rick was diving deep, dragging me with him into memory's dark waters. The images he described grew graphic, bloody horrors no mind should hold. I watched transfixed and horrified as behind the charming facade, shadows lurked that could never be banished. Rick seemed oblivious to my growing distress, too immersed in his own private terror. Suddenly, he slammed his fist down, making me jump. They just kept coming, swarming like flies drawn to carrion, wave after wave of faceless insurgents. I had no choice, he growled. None at all. My heart thudded as unwelcome pictures flooded my mind, feeling foolish yet frightened by this volatile stranger. Carefully, I tried diverting topic, but Rick was beyond reason now, lost in his own chaos. Abruptly, he sprang up, nearly overturning the table. I shrank back, pulse wild as he began ranting to unseen demons in the rafters. Cartoon characters. He muttered, "Don't trust their tricks." Always watching, laughing. Paralyzed, I watched in horror as Rick viciously batted the air, tearing at his clothes. Patrons cried out, some running as his naked frenzy escalated. When his bloodshot gaze fixed on me with frightening intensity, I bolted. Outside, the warm night felt suddenly menacing. Which way had I come? Alleys twisted like a maze as my panicked mind raced. Then a guttural howl rose behind me, closer than thought possible. Icy fingers of terror raked my spine. Rick's booming voice echoed off brick walls, incoherent threats and pleas. Catch me, little bird. Let me show you the truth. Shadows shifted as his hulking form hurtled ever nearer, madness fueled by inhuman speed. My lungs were about to burst, yet stopping meant death. Finally, a slit of lamplight peeked ahead. A main drag. Cars, people. I burst from the alley screaming, nearly mowed down by a swerving sedan. Rick emerged barely a stride behind, reaching now with claws outstretched to drag me back into nightmares. But his naked state drew alarmed attention, and a security guard tackled him, pinning kicking limbs to the pavement. As police vans pulled up, colored lights whirling wildly, Rick howled denials and promises to the stars. No one understands. He wept, no one knows the truth. Only I can show you. His wild eyes found mine above the chaos, piercing right through my soul with frightening intensity. Then he was gone, loaded like cargo, but the images seared my mind's eye where they would forever lurk in shadowy memory. Shaking violently, I collapsed into a kindly stranger's arms as wailing sirens faded into the night. Rick's unstable grip on reality had been revealed in the most shattering way, yet somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. In his wake, I was left even more profoundly shaken and alone with my fears and the unanswerable question of why some wounds can never heal. The stale air of my apartment offered no refuge from waking nightmares. Every creak of old wood sounded like claws on brick. Every shadow held Rick's looming figure. Sleep evaded me entirely as the long night dragged on. So I rose with the first pale light to move, to not think. A jog seemed the safest plan. Empty park trails where no demons lurked in alleyways. The morning held a deceptive calm, but under its harmless facade. Was I truly alone? My steps echoed too loud as paranoia gnawed relentlessly at frayed nerves. Every rustle made me jump. Every snap of a twig sent my heart racing painfully until I was drenched in cold sweat. Finally home, I collapsed, drained yet no more at peace. Curling on the couch, I replayed the shattering sequence on endless loop, trying vainly to stitch meaning from madness. But Rick's unraveling grip defied logic or closure. Who was the stranger I thought I knew? The questions tormented as shadows lengthened once more into evening. Finally, a brisk knock jerked me from toxic thoughts, hoping so desperately for distraction, yet fearing another phantasm had come. With a steadying breath, I cracked the door open. Only a Girl Scout. Thank God, selling cookies. As night fell in earnest, no solace came. What would I give to switch off this mind, if only for an hour of oblivion? But thoughts circled endlessly as outside. The city wound down to its quietest. Finally restless, I switched on the porch light and paced, rubbing arms against the chill. A creak sounded behind me, birth of every nightmare. I whipped around gasping to find nothing, of course. But try as I might, imagination refused reining in. Every shadow held a bogeyman. When a hoarse call shattered the heavy silence, I nearly leapt out of my skin. Melissa Saya echoed down the empty street, grating gravel and madness. My blood ran to ice. A huge shape detached itself from blackness, loping like some feral beast, driven beyond reason. I scrambled inside, slamming the flimsy lock, just as Rick's hulking form crashed into the frame with primal fury. "Let me in," he bellowed, hammering the thin barrier between me and oblivion. Heart in my throat, I backed away, step by shuddering step as Rick's demolition continued in an epileptic fit of rage. "I see the truth," he howled at the uncaring moon. "Only I can save you from their lies." Splinters sprayed as wrecking blows intensified, unrelenting in goal to drag me back with him into eternity's chaos. For endless minutes, the assault raged on until with one final terrific crash, the lock ripped free entirely. Time slowed to a crawl as Rick's massive torso blocked out the very stars. His wild eyes found mine across an infinity, gleaming with so much crazed love. With inhuman speed, Rick lunged straight at me with outstretched claws, face contorted into a feral mask of promised death. I threw myself sideways, barely avoiding his grasp, feeling searing talons graze flesh. Rolling frantically towards the phone, my questing fingers swept against cold tiles. Where was it? A furious roar shook the walls as Rick regained footing, bearing down like some vengeful leviathan from the pit. Hope died within my paralyzed form, preparing with numbed dread for violation's merciless grip. At the last second, fingers closed around salvation's plastic form, though it may prove too little, too late. With tortured fingers, I punched 911 with blurring speed through a sobbing prayer. Come on, come on. Please, God, as Rick's hulking shadow drew inexorably closer. His rumbling breath washed bile, stinking down my shuddering spine. Primal grunts, promising eternity's violation. Fingers closed around my flailing ankle with crushing force, dragging me inevitably toward doom. Then, muffled yet miraculous, sirens. Distant yet gaining, sweeping salvation closer on whirring wheels of blue and red. New hope swelled my desperate heart as outside. The wail swelled to a deafening crescendo. Rick froze, cocking his misshapen head to the uncanny song as if grasping comprehension like a wild beast. His baleful gaze found mine once more, gleaming with so much fractured love. "Please," he rasped, clutch weakening. "I only wanted to help you see. Don't fight, little bird. Let me keep you safe." Thunderous pounding shook the flimsy walls then, as outside salvation arrived on pounding boots. "Police, open up." Rick's eyes glazed with fear and rage, grinding his teeth like a cornered predator. With superhuman strength, he wrenched me fully into the air, maw gaping for the killing strike. Just then, the door exploded inward on a hail of gun. Trained flashlights. "Freeze! Let her go, now!" Rick howled, twisting toward righteous wrath with flailing limbs and bared fangs. A deafening crack split the night, reverberating through my skull like divine judgment. Rick spasmed, gazing down almost curiously at the blossoming red. His fingers loosened, frame crumpling bonelessly to reveal my trembling saviors, silhouetted against emergency's swirling chaos. Strong arms enfolded my shuddering form, pulling me safely across the shattered threshold as inside, paramedics swarmed the fallen monster. Rick grasped vainly into the oblivion, pooling from his mortal wound, pleading softly now to forgiveness that would never come. His dimming eyes found mine one last time, gleaming with so much confusion and sorrow it almost broke my soul. Then he sighed, frame sinking limp and small against the wreckage as demons fled his shattered mind forever. Outside, sirens wailed on into the starry dark crimson lights whirling in furious mercy. I collapsed against an officer's Kevlar bulk, grasping salvation's solidity as the first gray fingers of dawn slit the eastern sky. Though Rick's unstable grip was ended, I knew the fractured images etched upon my mind could never fully heal. Yet somehow in surviving this narrowest escape from chaotic violence, a deeper strength had been awakened within my soul that no evil could ever break. The future stretched unknown, yet I felt renewed,